are simple. Each candidate gets a minute and a half opening statement, a minute closing statement. We will ask questions to sometimes just one or two, sometimes all 6 of them. If they give an answer that you really like and you want to applaud, I know a lot of debates won't let you do that. You get to do that here. We encourage that. Let them know what's the good stuff to do. And with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right on in. We have opening statements from left to right, starting with Mr. Sheep.
Hey,
Oh, no, I turned it on.
I'm Dan Sheep.
You have to really eat these ones. Eat it.
Okay. Okay. I'm Dan Sheep. I'm an attorney who makes his living suing big companies. I am a father of 3 girls in the public school system here in Seattle that I'm raising with my husband. And I am a community volunteer. And the subject matter of the organizations I work with ranges from civil rights, civil liberties, to education, to anti-oppression and anti-violence. I'll just tell you a little bit about what I believe, which is that government has an important and rightful role to play as an equalizer of opportunity. And that starts with the public education system, making sure that's properly funded and serves the students well. It goes on to include higher education, making sure that's accessible and affordable for people, and that it doesn't leave kids burdened with lots of debt. It also includes making sure we have good housing and transit policies so that more people can participate in the amazing opportunities of our region, and making sure we move to a clean energy world so that future generations can participate in all that opportunity. And finally, it also includes making sure that people's opportunities are not deprived because of homelessness, because of mental illness, because of disability, because of mistakes they might make that really don't belong in the criminal justice system. So that's some of what I believe. The support for the campaign has been amazing so far. We have over 400 donors, and we've gotten the endorsements most recently of that champion of public education, Gary Locke, and the former seat holder of this particular seat, and State Senator Jamie Peterson. Thank you, and I hope I can get your support as well.
First, I want to thank the young Democrats for having us here tonight as a guest. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. My name is Thomas Pitchford. I'm running to bring my passion for service and experience building coalitions to Olympia and to work with people of 43rd District. I've had a number of professional and volunteer experiences that have allowed me the opportunity to mentor lots of Washington's next generation of leaders. That includes work at UW, WSU, also work with Out in Front, an organization called Graduate Washington, which works for affordable education for college students. And I'm also been involved with the Institute for a Democratic Future. And I've advised many Democratic political candidates. And then I fought for a number of years for the cause of equality and built Equal Rights Washington for several years. But we have tremendous challenges ahead that I see. That's the way I see it. First, healthy communities, begin with education. We have to fully fund education with fair and equitable taxes that require corporations to pay their fair share. We have to make sure that the education system works for all of our children. We must end discipline policies in schools that have shut down, that caused the prison pipeline essentially. And we must shut down the private prison private prison companies while we're at it as well. We have to replace that with a pipeline to college. And then we must amply fund our social safety net to meet the needs of what has been estimated to be 35,000 homeless students in Washington. There also have to be a standard bearer for 43rd. Anyway, thank you so much.
My name is Nicole Macri, and after years of working on issues of justice, safety, and equity, I'm really excited to be running for the state legislature in the 43rd District. As my partner, Deb, who's here in the back, and I watch our city grow and prosper, we're really disturbed by how many people are being left behind. And as lesbians who've lived on Capitol Hill for the last decade, we really see the changes in our neighborhood. They're palpable. I've been working on issues of affordable housing, homelessness, mental health care, and for a very long time. And currently I'm the Deputy Director at DESC, the Downtown Emergency Service Center. As the President of the Board of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, I've worked on state housing policy issues and expanding affordable housing across our state. And I've championed policies for renters who are facing discrimination and displacement. I've led effective advocacy organizations and worked directly with elected officials, neighborhood stakeholders, union members, and the people who are most harmed by inadequate public policies to move forward positive policy changes. I've been a pioneer in what's known as the Housing First approach, and I've been integral in making that national policy for how we address homelessness. It's these experiences that not just give me the perspective, but the skill that's needed in Olympia today. So they have also given me the sole endorsement of a number of community leaders, including City Attorney Pete Holmes, 6 current and 2 former City Council members, and Representatives Lori Jenkins and Jean Robinson. We are facing an affordability crisis in our community like never seen before, and I'm ready to work on it, and I hope I can have your support and your vote. Thank you.
Hi. Hello? Is it on? Hi, thanks for hosting this, and thanks everyone for attending. I'm honored to be here with my fellow candidates. My name is Samir Wanaday. I'm running because the roles and responsibilities of this position offer a platform to promote justice and build a more inclusive society. I grew up in Kennewick. I got my BA from Washington State, my master's in public administration from UW, and since my youth, I've been driven to achieve social good. My drive, my policy and coalition building work experience, and my desire to engage people qualify me for this role. I've worked on the staff of 3 members of our congressional delegation, staffed the Washington State Legislature twice. I've served the president as an intern in the White House and as an organizer on both of his elections. I've mobilized public school teachers to pass a constitutional amendment to make it easier to fund public schools in our state, and I've held jobs with several environmental nonprofits. I think the state has a duty to look out for the well-being of present and future generations. Here's some policy outcomes I will seek to achieve with that in mind. The racial and economic divides in King County should be reduced. Seattle's housing density and affordability increase. Our energy, water, transportation, and building infrastructure should be fixed, modernized, efficient, and resilient to climate change and other disasters. Educational institutions should be fully funded and equitably managed. Everyone who wants a job should get one. We become a model for women's rights and human rights, and campaigns are publicly financed. And yes, that's it. Thank you very much. I would appreciate your support.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight, and thanks to the Young Democrats for hosting. My name is Scott Forbes, and I am a Democrat. I have been the local Democratic Party chair, the chair of the 43rd District, for 4 of the past 5 years. I stepped down to have a baby. I have a 9-month-old son at home. I think the challenge tonight is going to be if any of the 6 candidates say something that one of the other 5 would disagree with. If you listen to everything that's been said so far, there is not a single issue that will distinguish any of these candidates before you. So really the question is, and when you ask any candidate in any race, it should be, what do you want to achieve in office? And then second, how do you plan to achieve it? How are you going to get it done? And what I have been doing for the past several years is what a lot of you have been doing in the audience. Has been working within the Democratic Party to build it up, to make it stronger, to make it more progressive, and to make it more effective. Because that is what we need. That is how we're going to make progress on all of these issues. We all agree on what needs to be done, and we could send anybody in this room to represent the 43rd and speak to these issues and write beautiful bills that die in the Senate. But we need to make progress. We need to get results, and to do that, we need to coordinate more effectively between Democrats, and that is what I have been working toward, and that is what I will do for you in Olympia. Thank you.
20 seconds. My name's Marcus Courtney, and I want to thank the Young Democrats for hosting tonight's forum. Like many, I was a temp worker at Microsoft in the late 1990s, and I did not have any employer-paid benefits such as health care, sick leave, or retirement. There were thousands of other workers like me facing a similar situation. I thought it was wrong and unfair that a wealthy company such as Microsoft did not treat its workers more fairly by offering decent benefits. So I took a big risk and put everything on the line and began organizing my coworkers to form the first union for tech workers in the country to demand decent benefits and workplace rights for all employees at Microsoft. Right now, in Seattle, we're facing tremendous prosperity. But yet, we can see that many are being left behind. The prosperity is not being shared by all. Because of this prosperity, we have a unique opportunity to change the politics of Washington State, and I believe we can change the politics by acting together. We can create a politics in Washington State where the corporations pay their fair share in taxes, where we can have affordable housing for all by passing rent control, where we can create jobs where there's equal pay for equal work, where we can find real solutions to climate change and take on the climate deniers. For example, we can accelerate the adoption of the electric vehicle. My name is Marcus Courtney. I am asking for your vote. Thank you.
I would like to ask everybody, and I have several questions for each of you, but I'm going to start this one with an open one that I would like to hear an answer for. Also, if you see me typing, I'm not being rude or disrespectful like this one. I'm actually coming up with more questions based on what you're saying. So those they're coming as you speak. So, but this is the first one. Washington State has one of the most progressive tax structures in the country, as everybody here knows. But for decades, lawmakers have been unable or unwilling to come up with solutions. As a result, income inequality has only widened. There is a definite interest among voters in creating more egalitarian tax structure. However, two of the most commonly proposed solutions, an income tax and a capital gains tax, have been found by Fuse Washington to not only be relatively uninspiring to voters, they have also been found to be not particularly effective in solving the larger issue of our incredibly disparate tax system. So my question is, as a legislator, what policies would you propose, what specific policies would you propose to create a tax system which not only works for more Washingtonians, but also ensures that our budget is robust enough to make improvements and investments? So I want policies. For Scott's note, I want to hear policies. Let's go backwards to forward. Let's start on this end and go through.
Okay, so first of all, I would disagree with Fuse and say,
Okay, also we have to say before you even disagree, that's data from talkback surveys that they've been conducting over the last 6 months. So it's literally voters have told them they actually don't give a fuck about those particular policies. So independent of those policies, something else.
Could you repeat what those two policies were?
It's income tax and capital gains tax, which is what I think largely the left thinks is really good solutions, and they have actually been doing research on it with All in Washington for the last 6 months, and found that they are incredibly uninspiring to voters, but it's something that the left tends to fall back on. So I want something independent of those two policies.
well, first of all, I'm in favor of creating an income tax in Washington State. So in terms of, I'm right now as the candidate, I'm the only candidate in this race that has called for the rollback of the Boeing tax cuts until there's accountability measures for terms of that. Boeing has, in terms of, gotten the largest tax cut in corporate history in terms of over $300 million, and they're still shipping thousands of jobs outside the state. The legislature and the governor made a mistake when they implemented those tax breaks for Boeing without job guarantees. So one I would do is roll back the Boeing tax cuts. The second thing I would do is look at all the tax breaks in terms of the companies are getting generated through the state legislature and hold them accountable, which can generate billions of additional revenue to fund the priorities around education, transportation, housing, and homelessness.
Okay, starting to Hannah's point, the reason that Fuse Washington is finding that polling is terrible on these issues is because Democrats are not being effective at laying the groundwork for them. We went out to voters with Initiative 1098 6 years ago, and we went out with the most muddled message in history. We went out and said, vote for this state income tax and we'll lower your taxes. And almost 2/3 of voters said, we don't believe you. And they went down in flames. And we have done nothing since. We have done nothing to lay the ground for this with voters, to get out there and start messaging around how we need to invest, how we need to plan ahead, how we need to invest in our future on education, on infrastructure. We need to change the conversation about this. Also, specific policy-wise, I will be pushing for things that Seattle and that King County can do, because these are areas where we are willing to tax ourselves. But right now, the only options that the state has for us on the table are regressive options. We're funding the housing levy with regressive options. We're funding Sound Transit 3 with regressive options. I will be pushing for progressive local options for Seattle and for King County. We used to have a progressive car tax. We used to have a progressive motor vehicle excise tax until Tim Hyman destroyed it. I will be pushing to bring it back. And there are other things that we could be doing locally where we want to tax ourselves, where we recognize the benefit of government services, and we can get them without continually raising our regressive taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty ridiculous that our state is has such a regressive tax system for being as progressive as it is in some other areas. I also wholeheartedly support a progressive income tax and a capital gains tax. And I think another thing that Hughes probably said was that the way we talk about it is why people may not like it. Like, we need to talk about everybody paying their fair share. And we probably need to do a better job of articulating the revenue needs that we have and drawing those connections. But as far as, in addition to those things, I would support a number of things, like expanding our sales tax to cover more services, because it hasn't reflected the changes in our economy. I think there's things you can buy online. There's things that aren't taxed by the sales tax, so let's expand it to more services. Let's also look at innovative bonds. I know at the federal level you can have like green bonds for innovation. I want to look deeper into what we can do for that at the state level. Let's definitely close all of those loopholes. I agree with what Marcus said. I mean, any of these tax breaks that we give, they need to be up for reevaluation every couple of years to see that they're providing a public benefit. And, one thing that particularly irks me is the oil industry tax break. That's about $20 million a year. I mean, think about all of the things that we could use for that. So and a carbon charge. I will propose that to raise revenue, and I will also propose reducing the regressive nature of it through investing it in the right way. That will generate some revenue for the state.
So I just want to make clear that Democrats are just as guilty as Republicans in the dysfunction of our tax code. We have over 600 tax exemptions, and the majority of them have been enacted in the last 5 years. So what we need to do is get disciplined as Democrats about rolling back these tax breaks, particularly ones that are targeted to powerful special interests and that have no demonstrated public benefit. And there are many of those. So I think working on rolling back tax breaks is the first thing that we can do, bringing transparency, creating sunsets into every single tax break that is enacted, I think is critical. I think we need to roll back sales tax. I think, as Samir says, we need to expand what is eligible for sales tax, but the sales tax rate is too regressive and it harms low-income people. In fact, there have been studies that show that the benefit to low-income people in the services they received through services that are created through a sales tax, there is a net negative impact on low-income people, and so we really need to work on that. I do support a progressive income tax, but I want to say the message of tax fairness does not resonate with the voters. The message of return on investment. If we want excellent schools, if we want safe communities, if we want a clean environment, then we need to invest.
So one of the things that, and just having talked with Spencer Olsen the other night about this, and seeing some of the work they've been doing, he said what they're finding as they're going around the state is that they're finding that folks are not aware of what the state budget looks like. They're often not aware that we're in a regressive tax situation. They don't understand these things, and so a lot of that has to do with general education about what's going on out there. And he said generally people are feeling that they can agree on a lot of the same things, that they feel like they understand, that we have to meet our needs. But in addition to, and I think that there should be, because on one hand, if anyone who's read McCleary, it'll tell you that this is, we've had so far 40 years of bad decisions that have said, here's what's wrong, and we finally left McCleary, started in the school districts in 1975 here in Seattle. said, we are not we don't have a reliable spending vehicle for a reliable revenue vehicle for our schools. And so what's happened is we have a dangerous reliance on the market-driven sales tax on one side. We've got a heavy reliance on the levy base on the other side. In some cases, up to 38% of a school district's budget is in levy bases. And it's levy bases because we've grandfathered in and we've just allowed this stuff. But then you've got this next part where we've got all these programs that they've tried to do, and it's basically they've fallen flat. So we've got to also do, in addition to that, we've also got to take back all of the company tax breaks that we've done, reevaluate them. We've got to expand the estate tax as well. So.
There we go. Wait. I got a follow up that I want literally. Oh wait. Oh, we have one more. Oh my God, this is such a big deal. But also I have a follow up, and I think it's one more answer.
Question.
Yeah.
No, so I mean, I'll answer the question, but I will challenge the premise slightly, which is, I agree that people don't find these things sexy, but that doesn't mean we can't strive for them. In fact, we have to. But these.
The premise is also that they're not super effective. They actually don't close the gap effectively enough. But go on.
Well, I would challenge that. I mean, most states make it work. Most states make it work with an income tax.
Yeah,
so
but they're okay. Go on.
Yeah, but a higher capital gains tax won't close the gap. I grant that. But that is one where the messaging is actually relatively easier. I agree that income tax one is something that's going to be long term. We're not going to get that in the next biennium. But that doesn't mean we can't lay the groundwork for it. But what we do need is a higher cap gains tax that will bring in quite a bit. But if you want to go outside of those categories, what do we have? We have an estate tax that could be bumped up. It's not quite as effective as the higher cap gains because there's so much headroom left by the federal system. The higher cap gains are taxed at half of the rate of regular income. If you're telling me that can't be hit, then I think we have a fundamental difference on what tax policy should look like. And then of course a carbon tax. I mean, we should be imposing a fee for pollution, and it does have to be implemented. There's devils in the details, but that is another source that we really need to hit.
One more follow-up text question, and you just say yes or no. Repeal the taxes on tampons and other feminine goods. Yes or no? Go.
I'm not even aware of them.
So that's positive. Half the population pays taxes on a good that they need literally every single month, and it adds up over the course of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. Sales tax. Tampons and other feminine goods, which are required by most women and some men, are taxed wholly under the sales tax. So, and a lot of states have repealed it already.
No, I mean, we need to lower the sales tax. It is pushing it to its limit. So we've already gone too far.
Repeal or no? Repeal, yes or no, on that particular tax. Other states have done it.
I've given my answer.
Get rid of that.
Yes.
Yes, repeal.
Yes.
Yes, repeal.
There we go. All right, so that's a Sheridan one right there. So I'm actually going to jump in really quick because I was mentioning the housing levy this year. First, who on the stage is supporting the housing levy? There we go. All right, we got all six. Not that I'm getting paid to ask that. But of course, one of the big things that we're doing with the housing levy in the city of Seattle is to address the homelessness crisis, which, as we know, is not just a crisis in Seattle, but across the state of Washington. While the headlines focus on neighborhoods in our city, we do see there being ignored the 25% increase in youth homelessness in Snohomish County, or the rise in rural poverty and families living without stable shelter in all parts of our state. This year, attempts were made to free up funds from the rainy day fund to combat the crisis. Ultimately, all that was spent in new funding from the state was $1 million to sweep and fence off the encampments under I-5. Do you support using the rainy day fund for the homelessness crisis, and how do you effectively make that happen? Then also, how do you support the fence proposal as passed out of the legislature? And we'll go ahead and start on that side and work our way this way.
I mean, what is a rainy day fund for, but for emergencies like this? So yes, absolutely. And in terms of, what was your other question? Was about the fence?
The fence.
It's not a great solution. People don't have alternatives for where to go. So it's problematic. I do respect that people are doing the best job they can in trying to deal with a very difficult situation though, but no, I don't think they did.
In terms of using rainy day fund, absolutely, and the fence, no way. I just think that that is the wrong message all the way around, you know. If anything, we should be providing support services that go out and check on folks who are there, but we shouldn't fence an area off in hopes that they'll just go away. They're not going away. In fact, they have to just go somewhere else, and then that's another problem itself. So we've got to help them where they are.
So I helped advise Senator Nelson's proposal on the Rainy Day Fund, Bringing Washington Home Act, and I support use of rainy day funds for homes. This is despicable. We had incredible political will to address homelessness. We have states of emergency in multiple cities across our state, and literally the only new dollars that went into addressing homelessness this year was $1 million to potentially build a fence. I am grateful for local politicians who are fighting this at the city council level and thinking about other ways we can leverage that $1 million to the benefit of people who are in the most dire straits ever. I've operated street outreach programs for over a dozen years and know that punitive measures just do not work for people. Assertive, community-based outreach and engagement and housing-based solutions are what end homelessness. And that's where I think our investments need to go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not ideal that we have to use the rainy day fund. I think, I mean, it would be great if we had like a steady source of revenue, but yeah, I mean, I definitely support using that. I don't like the idea of like creating a fenced community. Just one thing that kind of bothers me about Seattle and King County is the economic and racial stratification that we see, and just fencing a community in, it doesn't really seem to align with the inclusive society that I think we need to build. So no, I don't support the fencing thing, and yes, I would support use of rainy day funds.
Absolutely, yes. I would support the use of the rainy day funds to deal with our housing emergency. We are absolutely in a crisis situation, and we need to get people into homes. I am a strong supporter of housing first. I believe that we need more places for people to stay and for people to live, both temporarily and permanently, and would absolutely support using the rainy day fund for that. On the fencing proposal as proposed, I thought it was a terrible idea and still is. I hope we are able to divert that money and use it for something else. But no, definitely do not support putting a fence around the homeless. That is just ridiculous.
I support use of the rainy day fund, and I totally oppose the idea of the fence. I don't think we should criminalize homelessness. And that is exactly the idea of putting a fence around homeless encampments. It's almost criminalizing an absolute social crisis that is emerging. One of the things that's driving the crisis is the fact that working people have not gotten raises in their pay and income for decades, not only here in Seattle, but throughout this country. What is happening with the housing prices and rent prices of skyrocketing, it is clearly putting people out of reach of being able to find affordable homes. One of the things, from my understanding in terms of what's driving homelessness, is you could have a crisis in your life. You could have a healthcare crisis. You could be a victim of domestic abuse. You could just have something that lose your job one day. All of a sudden, you're not going to have support, and you find yourself out on the street. A lot of people have just been caught up in the economic in terms of the recession that has put them out of reach, the skyrocketing rent, and just have had a crisis. We need to find deeper solutions. And putting a fence around it is not a solution. It's criminalizing homelessness. But we also have to begin talking about that people simply are not making enough money to keep up with the cost of living, and we also need to address that. And as a legislator, I will do exactly that if you send me down to Olympia.
All right, staying on the topic of housing, as we all know, housing is a huge priority here in Seattle, and as Nicole mentioned, the city is doing a lot, and we need the state to do more. So in this past session, your potential seatmate, Speaker of the House Frank Chop, killed House Bill 2544, which would have allowed local governments to provide property tax exemptions to landlords who preserve affordable housing. Would you have done the same? And I want you to start your answer with yes, no, or I don't know. I guess We'll start with Scott and then go around.
No, I would not have done the same. I believe that we can have and must have more than one option for dealing with our housing crisis. And I understand, I actually spoke to Speaker Chop about his reasons for killing the bill. And there are definitely, I mean, his argument is that we are giving money to private developers and that we're not really building our public housing stock by paying developers to preserve housing, paying developers to develop housing. But I really believe that we need to have more than one approach to this, and that we need to be both giving developers incentive to preserve existing housing stock, giving developers incentive to build affordable housing as part of their projects, and then increasing our stock of public affordable housing, that both by acquiring and by building affordable housing. The only way to solve a housing crisis is with housing. You know, we are not going to solve this in any other way. And so we really have to, and this is where the state comes in, we have to increase the available funding and the amount of housing in Seattle. And that's what I'll be doing in Olympia.
And so, again, the thing is that there was a bill 2544 that would have provided a property tax exemption and to people who, to developers who provide like low-income housing.
Who preserve low-income housing.
Preserve low-income housing. Yeah, I would support that, so I guess I would have disagreed with the speaker. But I understand his position. I think there's a way that you can address it, because I think he may look at it as a tax giveaway to a wealthy developer who may not really, who may use that money for other things than what it's stipulated for. So I think you just have to have set conditions on the tax break. Like, we'll provide this great tax break, and as we provide it, you have to also provide multifamily housing. So I think that would be one way to get around it, and I just kind of want to echo what Scott said. I mean, there's a lot of solutions that we need for housing. More housing, I think, is a critical solution, and not only is it critical for equity to allow more people of all income levels to live in our city, but it's also a very critical low carbon solution. We won't achieve the 21st century clean energy, low carbon economy that we need if we do not allow for more denser housing. So whether it's a property tax break, whether it's more funding for the Housing Trust Fund, or several other innovative ways that we can encourage equitable housing, I think we need to do it, and I believe we can address what Speaker Chop's concerns are.
So I'll say that no, I would not have done the same thing as Speaker Chop, but I also would not have done the same thing as the City of Seattle, which is out of the housing affordability and livability agenda. There were 65 recommendations about expanding affordability, particularly for housing in our community, including this tax exemption bill. But my first play, if I were City of Seattle, wouldn't be a giveaway to landlords. The landlord lobby is strong in Washington State and is a primary reason why we have an affordability crisis, and in part is why renters continue to experience discrimination and displacement in cities across the state, including in Seattle. So I would not have started off with a landlord giveaway, and I totally respect the speaker's position on why he chose not to do that. But given the dire situation that we're in, we need to use all the tools that we have to expand affordability. I'm glad that in our local housing levy, we've added dollars to invest in the preservation of affordable housing in the private market in a way that allows short-term, that allows loans that will be returned back to the city instead of doing a full-on tax exemption for landlords.
Well, and I think too, what we have to think about is who's affected here. And it's, you know, it's not only when we're looking at the homelessness crisis, we're looking at municipal employees, folks like teachers who can't afford to live in the city anymore. And so we're pricing out these folks, as our market goes skyrocketing through the roof. What I think that we need to do, and I would not have agreed with the speaker's conclusion on that. I would have actually supported that, and I feel like we should. That's one way that we have to do that. You know, we've got the city. The city is a partner in some ways, but not in any thorough enough way that's going to really benefit any of these communities. We've got to be able to have a little bit more of an affordable housing stock. And we've got to incentivize developers to do this in some ways and let them understand, you know, you're going to do this, you're going to be a long-term city partner, you're not going to make as much as you make on some, you know, crazy high-rise, or you're going to have to take a portion of your development and put it towards income needs, you know, income-based community needs. We've not done that thoroughly enough, you know. What we have right now is an option for them just to buy their way out of the situation, you know? And that should not be the case, you know. We need to be able to provide appropriate level of housing for everybody in this city, and that includes folks who are at, either entry-level earning positions or folks who are in the most neediest of situations. We've got to be able to meet everybody where they are. Thank you.
So I think about my role would be as a state legislator is, of course, to set good policy, but B is to deliver what is needed for my district. And you know, what we had here was a city with a plan, and part of that plan called for property tax exemptions for these developers. And you know, my view is, if that's part of a consensus plan, you know, you need a pretty good reason to oppose that. And I don't think there was a strong enough reason here, so I would not have done what the speaker did. But I do recognize that this is a giveaway. It is a giveaway, but it's a giveaway because the way the law is currently structured, there's a lot of leverage given to developers and to landlords. And we can try to fix that, but in the end, you know, we need to deliver on the policy and give the policy requests and give the city the flexibility it needs to implement its housing plan.
I would agree with Speaker Chop on that bill, because I think he was very clear in terms of the idea of balancing in terms of how you spend public dollars versus private dollars for building housing, and in terms of taking that away. And I think there's so many concerns right now going on in Seattle, and I've heard this from, you know, I've knocked on hundreds and hundreds of doors throughout the district. And one of the things I hear continually from the people I'm visiting with the voters is, we have concerns that too much is being given to developers, and too much power is being given to landlords. How do we balance the power between landlords, developers, and people that need affordable housing and places to rent? And so I think he was absolutely correct. He spent his life developing affordable housing. I think he was making the right decision, ensuring that public dollars are spent in the right way to help ensure supply. And that's why I support, you know, ending the preemption on rent control. In terms of that we need to be able to balance the power between renters and landlords. And one way of doing that is ending the state preemption on rent control and allowing the city of Seattle to develop, if it chooses, policies around rent control, so people as a tool to help build more affordable housing.
So following up on that a little bit, first, another hands up question. Who on the stage is a renter? You know, as Marcus just pointed out, and so you don't get to answer this question because you already did, is, you know, we do have the state preemption on the ability for cities and municipalities to enact rent stabilization or rent control measures. On this stage, who would support working to repeal that, and how would you work to make that happen as a legislator from the 43rd? And we will start, I already know what your answer is going to be, so we'll start with Thomas this time.
So absolutely, you know, I think we've got to say that we don't know the answer to this. You know, in terms of having this ban on rent control, who says that should be an absolute? You know, just like we have this 1935 law that bans income tax. Who says that should be the case? We shouldn't look at these things as absolutes. You know, we've got to be able to say that we're exploring every option we can. Particularly if there are cases in cities where they show that rent control can be successful. And so we've got to be able to say that we're looking at every option we can look at for the people in the city.
Shall I go next, or is it the other way?
Let's go that way.
Okay.
Send it back that way.
No, I think I'm fine with repealing it. I mean, we need to give the city the tools and the flexibility it needs, and not just ours, obviously, I mean, repealing would affect all cities, to manage its crisis. Now, whether it's exactly how you implement it and whether we should have direct regulation of rents or regulation of the terms of leases, that is up for discussion. But I think the state should get out of its prohibiting of that tool for the cities to use when they deem it necessary.
So I support lifting the exemption, and really think that cities need to decide city by city what models will work for them. How you do it, so we can do it like the landlord lobby did in the 1980s when they got that law implemented. We can build power and make it happen. So I don't think this is the kind of legislation that'll happen through compromise. I think it's a case where we're going to need to really demonstrate that there is voice across the state that wants to see this exemption lifted. So that could be either through legislation or through ballot initiative. But I don't see this happening without a big show of power against the landlord lobby.
Yeah, I think probably by the ballot or an enormously well-organized progressive effort across the state to pressure our legislators would be necessary to pass this. We should definitely lift the ban on rent control. I think it's probably like one policy tool in a big toolbox. I suppose there may be some unintended consequences with rent control. I've heard that if you freeze a rent, maybe a landlord won't be motivated to maintain the place because they will think they won't be making much money on it. But I mean, you would have to write in certain stipulations and conditions on rent control. And from the 43rd, I would say, yep, pass it. And then I'd probably want to sit down with the city council members and work on effectively implementing it so that we avoid any unintended consequences and we make it an effective policy. But bottom line, this is probably like just a big fight, like against big oil and other big guys we're trying to big bad polluters and stuff like that we're trying to fight. This is also probably the person who's a low income renter. They probably don't have much political capital or power. So it's going to take a big lift to get this through the legislature.
I support lifting the statewide ban on rent control, and I think the argument that we need to make, the policy argument that we need to make, and I talked about this a little bit before when I was talking about tax policy, it's a local autonomy issue. It's about an issue that should not be decided at the state level. It should be decided at the local level. And we should be presenting it that way. This is an argument that should be able to be made to Republicans to say, you don't want, you're the party that says big government shouldn't be coming in and making decisions for us. Here's an example of the state government doing that. So let's reverse that. Let's take that back out of state law. And this is something that is a principle that we can put forward, and we can argue, I mean, from our perspective, Olympia is broken. The state legislature is not getting things done. We are spending millions of dollars to pass simple laws by ballot initiative because we can't get them through the legislature. And so we can make that argument that says, look, the less we have to do that, the better. The more time that we can get things done in Olympia, the better. And the more that we can hand off to states and counties, the better. So that's what we should be doing, and that's the argument we should be making.
Okay, so I have a question about what you just talked about, candidate Forbes, as kind of a follow-up. So due to the NRA and the gun lobby stronghold on much of the Wall-Edge, common sense gun laws, even those that law enforcement and former Second Amendment activists agree would actually be incredibly useful and necessary, have been stalled on the floor, resulting in costly ballot initiatives. These initiatives, like the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which is currently gathering signatures right now, have large voter support and can have help reduce gun violence in Washington. So what would you do as a legislator to reach across the aisle and ensure that these policy decisions, which have broad voter support and actually have fairly large support among legislators, would not have to become these costly ballot initiatives? How do you keep us from having to take these things from the ballot? And I'll actually just start right back. Let's start with Courtney and go all the way down. Let's start there.
I think in terms of with gun violence, we have to think how much it impacts families across the state. And I think gun violence impacts families in Republican districts, and they impact families in progressive and Democratic districts. I think we really need to reach out and work with the victims of gun violence that are in conservative districts and Republican districts where their legislator wants to block common sense gun reform and bring to the forefront of how simple solutions can save families and save lives. I think that's really, we have to put in the forefront of the stories of what's going on in terms of the victims of gun violence. And I think that is so powerful, and it can actually move legislators away from the powerful gun lobby and the interests that want to block any common sense gun reform. Is the powerful stories, because it's not just about gun violence, it's also, I think we have to start talking about it as a public health crisis. This is actually affecting, in terms of whether you can go to a movie theater, whether your child can go and be safe at school or at a playground or at a friend's house. And I think this is in terms of when children and there's victims of gun violence, it's actually a threat to public health and public safety. And I think we need to be talking about it in those terms and not just talking about it in terms of taking on the big gun lobby. And like I said, there's victims in terms of in Republican districts and Democratic districts that are faced with this. And this is how I think we need to begin addressing that, and I would do so as a legislator.
So the premise of this question was, how would you reach across the aisle to make progress on this issue? And my answer would be that I would not. I would work to take back the state Senate instead. I think this is actually a critical skill for a legislator, is knowing which issues you can reach across the aisle and find support and work together on, and which ones, which the path forward is to start defeating legislators on the east side and replacing them with ones that reflect their values of their constituents rather than reflecting the values of the gun lobby and the Republican Party. So for this issue, and this is an issue I care about deeply, I am strongly in support of the Extreme Risk Protection Orders ballot initiative. But part of the reason I have been working to build up the Democratic Party is so that organizations like the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility don't have to keep raising $1 million every time that they want to have a ballot initiative. We need to be building a better infrastructure in our state for Democrats and progressives to pass ballot initiatives. We need to be doing that at the party level. We need to be doing that with our progressive organizations so that every time we go to bat with a progressive initiative, we have the infrastructure in place to get out there and get signatures. We are reinventing the wheel every time, and we need to fix that, and that's what I'll be working toward.
Well, I would work it both ways. I would be happy to reach out to the Republican legislators, grab coffee, sit down and talk through the issues. And I know that may seem idealistic and stuff, but I actually was able to make some progress on that. I used to work I was a staff assistant for Senator Patty Murray in DC. Directly across the hall was conservative Senator Tom Coburn. And everyone's like, oh, I can't believe you work across from a super conservative senator. And I befriended the staff assistants, because I was a White House tour coordinator and I got to be in touch with every congressional staffer. We would have lunch once a month and to talk about religion and politics. And at the third lunch, at the end of the third lunch, the guy's like, oh, I get it, Samir. I get why you care about the environment, because it impacts people. And so I was like, yeah, I will take that same principle and apply it to these other things, comfortably trying to reach out, but while recognizing that everything that Scott said about building the party structure is also essential. I mean, we absolutely need to do that. And I have experience building statewide coalitions. I've worked for the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy, which has built a coalition of health advocates, business leaders, communities of color, and environmentalists to pass carbon reduction policy. And that principle can apply to other things, including stopping gun violence and labor and health, workers' rights and all. And so we need to keep that broad progressive coalition going. And I, as a legislator, I would use my skills to do that on the outside while working on the inside.
So I'm hearing everyone's platform is basically the same. So I'll say that, yeah, ever since kindergarten kids got gunned down and the gun lobby prevailed, I think making the case just isn't going to work. And I agree that we need to win majorities in order to change policies. like this without needing to go to the ballot. I'm also a big believer and have been very active in big tent coalition building. If every progressive interest group does not see how it has an interest in beating back the gun lobby, then we are doing something wrong. And I think while we have an amazing coalition with the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, we can broaden it even further. And we need to get political, not just focus on policy. We really need to be investing in electing progressives across the state. And I think as Democrats, we can continue to do a lot more work on that.
Nothing would please me more than to turn Eastern Washington blue. We're all living for that great dream one day. But you know, I also know that the other side of the state is fairly conservative. And having worked with Equal Rights Washington, just as an example, we've had to go out and get support from other folks outside of Seattle. And I remember, you know, having these important conversations, for example, with Norm Johnson, who's out in Central Washington, who we got to vote for domestic partnership rights back in 2009. And so we've got to, at the same time that we're building strong support for the Democratic Party, we've also got to try to bring Republicans along on these issues, you know? Because for us not to do that just basically walls ourselves off, you know? And I'm willing to say that we need to turn the Republican Party more progressive. But like with the income tax, you know, I'd like to see this happen. I'd like to see some revenue reform happen. I'm asking them to rise to the occasion of the leadership that they're expected to be rising to while they're serving their constituents. If they don't do that, we have about 35% in every election out there in Eastern Washington, and we can grow that. You know, I'm willing to grow that if they're not willing to lead, and that's the way. So that's the way it rolls.
I serve on the board of the ACLU of Washington, and one of our mottos there is no permanent allies, no permanent enemies. And you do it based on the issue and based on the legislation you're trying to pass. And with some gun legislation, it is going to be party line, and with others, it's not. And you have to build those relationships. You shouldn't forego those. And part of that is going to districts of people you disagree with, meeting with their constituents, understanding their gun culture and what they find so valuable, why it's such a part of it, because part of their lives, and understanding where the wedge is that can get your good policy passed. We only have to look back a few years ago. I think it was at HB 1840 that passed with the blessing of the NRA to get domestic violence victims the ability to get relief. A judge can order a perpetrator to surrender his or her firearms to the court or to the sheriff. Actually on a task force working to implement that law and to protect domestic violence victims from firearms violence. So the history of that bill proves that you can work across the aisle on rational gun control measures, and we can even pass more aggressive stuff because we have a current situation in the Supreme Court, which may change the law in this realm. But you got to use all tools and be willing to work with the other side, because there is some room, some daylight there for progress.
Cool. A few of you brought this up, so I figured I'd just ask everyone. This district, the 43rd district, may very well be the safest in the state for Democrats. But your ability to get anything done is really going to depend in large part on which party controls the House and which party controls the Senate. So if you're elected, how are you going to help Democrats take back the Senate and hold on to the House? And let's start with Samir.
I would help Democrats take back the Senate and maintain their lead, expand their lead in the House by working with them on progressive policies. In the 43rd, we are the liberal heart of the state. So as you go out to suburban districts where there's suburban Democrats, they're probably less progressive. And my professional experience is that there may be some suburban Democrats who are not as supportive of voting for a carbon charge, for example. So what I would really try to do, and just using that as an example, is sit down with them, provide them, have a back and forth. Obviously, I don't want to make it seem like I know everything, but I want to give them talking points and look, a carbon charge is not going to be bad for your constituents. It's going to be good for them. And here's why. And I'll also want to come out and campaign for them and utilize, because I think I'm a good campaigner, I want to utilize my skills on the Senate side too, and look at all of the organizations, progressive groups out there, and how can we build up those groups, and how can we get them to get more people to vote in their districts. Eastern Washington is not a complete wall. It has been broken before. There have been Democrats who have been elected, our own governor, for example. So we can do it. We just have to have a concentrated effort, and I will apply my coalition building skills, my election organizing skills to helping that happen.
So we need to do a lot of leadership development across the state to get candidates ready. And I think we can't depend only on the Democratic Party to do that. We have to depend on all sorts of community coalitions and progressive groups across the state to help begin to develop that leadership, from everything from community councils to town councils and all the way up. So we have folks ready. Hans Dunshee is not running for re-election, and who is the strong candidate who is emerging at the Democratic Party? I have not yet heard their name. So, I mean, we need to just be ready. We need to be constantly in developing strong candidates across the state and be using all the tools we have. So depending on all of our allied organizations across the state to help do that.
So we have a strong candidate emerging over the 41st district who's taking on Steve Litzak. I think, and it's Lisa. Yes, absolutely. So this is where it begins, you know, and it begins every cycle. We're gonna, you know, we had a really awful time back in 2009. We lost a lot of people in the Senate. These were folks that voted for equality measures that we had over years and years and years, and we lost those folks, you know. We've got to build up organizations like Progressive Majority. We've got to build up organizations like particularly Progressive Majority in Yakima, where they are building a tremendous base of great Latino supporters and future pipeline for elected officials. We've got to really work hard to build that base. And we've also got to identify candidates in these outlying areas. I worked with the Victory Fund in the past, and we worked to identify LGBTQ candidates out in rural areas, because we understand that it can't just happen here in Seattle. It's got to happen in other parts of the state if we're going to get what we need to get done. Thank you.
So your question asked about, noted that this is a relatively safe seat. And I think with that, you know, comes the opportunity and therefore the duty to help build your party. And that starts with, of course, us helping to raise money for the House Democratic Campaign Committee, the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee, and for candidates. And that's what I will be doing. You know, you have to dedicate the time to that. You have to go to evening events and other areas to do that. And that's what it's going to take to really build up our party. I've shown that I am a good fundraiser. I have surpassed the rest of the field here very substantially in my total fundraising, which I think demonstrates that I have the connections, the stamina, and the willingness to go out there and raise for the causes I believe in.
I think the great thing about being the legislator from the 43rd district is you can be a bold progressive and put new ideas out there on the table to actually grow the Democratic Party and grow the progressive movement in this state. So you can actually bring people in and bring people along to grow your majorities both in the House and the Senate. And I think we've been afraid to do that. We want to apologize for being a progressive. We want to apologize for our ideas. And I think when you're the legislator from the 43rd, you can put new ideas out there on the table. We can put policies out there on the table that says how we can find ideas for equal pay for equal work, how we can dramatically lower the cost for college tuition, which would be a huge benefit for working families, not only here in the 43rd district, but throughout the state, how we can find new ways for affordable housing. We've got to put together a bold progressive agenda that brings new people into our party and into our politics to create the change that we want to see and take on the establishment politics that is holding us back, take on the climate deniers, take on the powerful corporations that don't want to pay people with decent wages and decent benefits. We can make a difference, but we need to start with bold ideas, and as your legislator, I will do just that.
First, let me say how delighted I am to hear many of the candidates here talk about what they will be doing someday if elected to build up the Democratic Party. I have been working to build up the Democratic Party and make it more effective for years at a time. I was here in 2014, sending people across to the east side to vote, to get out there and knock on doors. I was here in 2012. I was here in 2010. I have been working to build a stronger and more effective Democratic Party for years and years at a time. And what we need to do, and the reason I am running to do this at the next level, is to get better organized, to be more effective, to coordinate, to work with legislators and candidates on the east side to get a better message out there, to get better strategy, to get better results. We need to be more coordinated at the next level to get things done. And that is what we need to be doing now. It's not something that I will start doing if elected. It is something that we are doing today, that we could be doing right now. And it's something that we need to work on and will be the first and foremost thing that I am working on the whole time that I am there. This is something, it is a safe seat in the 43rd, and that creates an opportunity to focus on what we can be doing statewide to build the party, what we can be doing on the east side to elect great candidates, what kind of messaging we need in eastern Washington and on the east side to get Democrats elected. And that's...
Sorry, I think you're going too long.
No, it's just that Derek brutally did not bring me one.
But yes, we need more effective coordination between Democrats, and that's what I have been doing at the party level, and that's what I'll be doing at the legislative level.
Excellent. So I'm actually going to ask two questions. I'm going to start with one, and that's for Mr. Shi. You brought up that you've raised the most money in this race, and taking a look at the campaign contributions for all of you, because I did that recently. What we love you, the PDC. Looking closely at that, Mr. Shi, 20% of your contributions are actually from Seattle. A total of 114 donors, $21,310, compared to the other end of the spectrum, which is Ms. Macri, who has 75% of her contributions from Seattle, 230 donors, with about $34,000. So with that in mind, while I think it's great that we're able to raise a lot of money, should voters in this district be concerned, particularly seeing that a lot of the funds for your campaign have been coming from the more conservative East Side and Mercer Island areas?
I don't know why they should be. You know, what that represents is people who believe in me as a person, as someone who gets things done, and as someone who is giving voice to those who don't have one. You know, there's been a lot of comment that, you know, a good chunk of my support, around half, has come from Asian Americans. And, you know, that's interesting because, you know, why should that be a surprise when we have so few Asian American voices in the legislature and essentially, you know, no Chinese Americans there? I mean, we really need a voice at the table, and people feel the void there of representation, and that's part of the reason for support. And beyond that, that support is, you know, some people may see an Asian American name. I see a person who is, you know, among the people on that list, a housekeeper at the Westin, a cook at Din Tai Fung, someone who sews in the back room at Filson. So these are real people supporting me, and the fact that some of them come from outside the district really shouldn't give anyone pause. These are people who see a candidate that they believe in, and I am honored to have their support.
You actually, I think, gave a great segue into the next question, which is for everybody but Nicole. And you know, with the recent exit from the race of Danny Askini, there remained only one woman who was running for this seat. The 43rd has not had a woman representing our district in 10 years. 2/3 of the state legislature are men, the overwhelming majority being straight white men. And right now we have two of our LGBTQ legislators, Brady and Jim Moeller from the 49th, are not seeking re-election to the state legislature, with Christine Kilduff in a tough re-election battle. Study after study shows that having Democratic women and LGBTQ individuals in state legislatures leads to legislation better designed to protect women's rights, paid family leave, healthcare access, and the protection of civil liberties. How does your candidacy improve the ranks of diversity amongst our House members, and why should voters support you over an equally qualified female candidate? And we'll go ahead and start with the two straight white dudes.
Well, I think one thing about the 43rd Legislative District represents is the values. In terms of leading bold progressive values, in terms of electing a wide diversity of candidates. And my whole life, I've championed the underdog, and I think I've championed working people, and I've taken risks in terms of the ideas of what the 43rd District represents. And so I think going down to Olympia in terms of I was a temp worker at Microsoft, that didn't have any employer-paid benefits or health care, and organized the first union for tech workers in the country, taking a risk and standing up for working people. I've been a member of the King County Conservation Voter Board, championing the environment. I moved overseas and worked with an international trade union federation for 5 years and worked on human rights issues in 42 different countries around the world. And I think my background in working the environment, standing up for working people, and standing up for human rights all over the world is part of the values of the 43rd District. And I feel I can bring that voice down to Olympia, and I'm willing to work with anybody that wants to champion the issues of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, because that's exactly what I've done for 18 years of my life, is championing the rights for all so we can live in a more fair and equal society.
First of all, I want to say that I would have been absolutely shocked if Michael Maddux had not asked this question at some point. This is not the first time I have run into this issue. I was the chair of the 43rd District Democrats and broke a streak of women chairs in order to become chair of the 43rd, and was running against an LGBTQ candidate. So I think in the premise of the question, all other things being equal, we do need more diversity in Olympia. And we do need more voices in Olympia in order to have that. And there are people I have worked with for years, people who I've served with on the board of the 43rd, who have basically told me that in any race where I am running and one of the other candidates is more diverse, they will be voting for the other candidate. And I respect that. I respect that some people will make the decision on that basis. But all other things are not equal. And so when we talk about who should represent the 43rd and who is the best representative of the 43rd, I'm running because I believe I'm the best candidate. And really, if there's anybody here at the table who can't say that, I'd like to talk to you after this debate. But so I'm running because I want to get us better organized and more effective, and believe that I have the skills and the capability to do that. And so that's why I am presenting myself as a candidate. I think this is a decision for the voters of the 43rd, and I respect whatever decision they make.
Thank you for sharing that stat, Mike. Michael, I did not know that. And yeah, I mean that makes sense. All I can say is that if elected, I will be a representative of every voice in the district, and I will ask, Cole or Danny or the LGBTQ community or women's rights groups. I will ask them, tell me what are the specific policies you want me to work on, and have an open door policy. And we all come from different angles. Like, I'm very passionate about climate, for example. But this campaign has been a learning experience for me, talking to different people and seeing where everybody comes from. And I want to truly represent your concerns, and human rights, improving the human condition, has always been a motivation for me since I can remember. So I will legislate with that lens. And I totally acknowledge, I'm even inspired by Nicole's candidacy or Danny's candidacy. I'm inspired by our president, who's half black. Even though, simply forget about any policy he may propose, just the fact that we have a half black president in the White House is inspiring to me. So I recognize that. I will bring some diversity to the legislature, and that I am a person of color. I'll probably be the first Indian American elected to the state house. But even more importantly than that, I will drive forward policies of justice in every area, including LGBTQ and women's rights. I'm very much concerned about that.
And I agree. I'm running on the strength of my candidacy, and I've worked for a number of years on behalf of a number of progressive causes. And one of the prime reasons that in 2012, I worked with Kathleen Drew's campaign, who was running for Secretary of State at the time, is that I got a great article from Blair Butterworth, who's an older political consultant, who sent me an article all about the vacuum of women's leadership that's happening around the country. And so, I was really driven to work for Kathleen because of that, because I feel like we wanted to try to get her office. Unfortunately, we did not, although another woman took the seat. The only 2 women running in the state's executive seats at that time. So worked hard to try to get her elected, but also, understand that I've got a long streak of commitment to civil rights, to reproductive justice, to all of the progressive causes that we all hold dear, and those are part of my value structure. I also feel like I've got a unique mantle from a civil rights perspective to work from. Having worked to build Equal Rights Washington over the course of 5 years, I saw nearly every piece of major rights legislation and worked to keep the lights on over there. And believe me, anyone that's worked at a nonprofit, it's a hard time to keep the lights on in nonprofit world. It's really tough, But it was really worth it because we were able to see some of the greatest things that we wanted to have happen. And so that's what I'm running on, is the strength of my candidacy, and I hope to have your support because of that.
Was the question directed at me too? You said it was riffing off of my answer, so.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So I mean, I don't think this is a check the box sort of thing. I think we all bring some diversity to would bring diversity to the legislature. There are a lot of important voices that need to be present at the table, and those are women's voices, those are racial minority voices, those are LGBT voices. I suppose fill in many of those boxes. As a gay Asian and father of 3 girls. But I think there's a lot more to diversity than that even. And I think you want to look behind those labels at what people bring. And my own, just looking at myself, I mean, I bring, a diversity of experiences from my professional background, working in everything from retail, food service, warehouse labor, computer programming, some business work, some law work, and my nonprofit work. So there's a lot of, and all of us, I think, bring, diversity along, different lines, and would add a lot to the discussion. So I do think it is inspiring to have women, or it would have been inspiring to have a trans woman in the legislature. And I was really excited by Danny's candidacy, for example. But I don't think that's checking the box is exactly the way to go.
So now I'm going to ask Nicole a question. Recently in Seattle, we had a really excellent example of the kind of sexism that women in policy face. We saw a backlash against women, not only because of their decision, but because of the way that the media covered that decision. It was absolutely geared because of the way that that coverage happened. As a woman in politics, what do you think is, galvanize for me a little bit the unique challenges that even if everyone else in the field, even if all of the other candidates, promise to consult Planned Parenthood and Emily's List, whoever else, what are the things about being a woman that absolutely no one else can match the candidate?
So I want to comment about that experience of the city council members. For me, it was a real example of what women in leadership in particular have to face every single day. And what it's about is when women demonstrate real power, how vehement the backlash can be. So when we rely on tokenism in place of true representation and power building, there can be a facade that we can misconstrue. So I want to be clear about that it remains very intimidating for some segment of the population when women exert real power. So I have been in leadership field for a very long time in the field of affordable housing, and I don't know how familiar you all are with that, but it is a field that is mostly dominated by white older men. And so I am very familiar with the need to really be bold and to build power, which is a theme of all of my answers, but it is exactly right. So I think it's more than just the experience of being a woman. It is the experience of being marginalized amongst the dominant society that is relevant.
Okay, now I have a question that we would be gutted by our constituents if we didn't ask. By far, one of the biggest criticisms of the current YDUW has been their inability to address the findings of the McCleary decision and adequately fund schools. I know in opening remarks, several people mentioned this. Instead of kicking the can for another year, what would you as a legislator do to ensure that Washington fulfills its paramount duty? And everyone's answers, I think it's one obviously everyone's going to ask. You can practice your answers now as a problem. Let's start with Samir and go roundabout that way.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have touched on this, but a couple of weeks ago, I rolled out a policy proposal, an economy-wide charge on carbon emissions. It would raise $2 billion in revenue. I have proposed allocating $1 billion of that to K-12 schools with certain conditions on that. But so that would be one solution, is to come up with more creative ways like a carbon charge. And then we had already talked about other revenue stuff. Yes, I mean, I will bring to the table a progressive income tax, a capital gains tax, and also look for other innovative ways that we can raise revenue by closing wasteful exemptions, by expanding the application of the sales tax to cover more services, while also lowering it to reduce its regressive nature. I will absolutely not stand for any cuts. I mean, I've definitely heard, as everyone probably heard, like the Republicans are very likely to want to cut discretionary spending. We cannot afford to do that. Our state will suffer, our economy will suffer. People at the lowest scale of the income ladder are going to suffer if we continue to cut programs like TANF, like SNAP, if we don't fund higher education, provide state need grants. So I think part of it is going to be proposing all of these great revenue-raising measures, but also having leadership, negotiating skills, and sitting there at the table and really trying to make the Progressive Caucus stand firm to support new revenue.
Sure, you can
Okay. So I think we need to, I think in 2017 really look at these tax exemptions and closing them. But I think what we need to do is in our messaging juxtapose what the possibilities are if we invest in our schools with what the benefit is if we keep the tax exemptions. And we have not painted that picture for our constituents across the state. And I think if Washingtonians better understood what we're getting out of tax exemptions versus what the possibility is of what we could get out of a fully funded public education system, that we would have a much easier time coming to agreement in the legislature. So I think we have a long road ahead in terms of dramatic tax reform, and so we shouldn't be too Pollyanna about what's possible in the next biennium, but I think we need to be bold on our messaging here, and I'm a little bit concerned that we have not yet mobilized on that point, because January 2017 will be here before we know it.
So with the court, we're headed towards a showdown anyway in 2018. There's a deadline at which the court will say, all right, you've had your time to do something about it. And in talking to some legislators, the fear is at the end of the session, while everything has happened, that's supposed to happen, they feel like they're going to come back and there'll just be another hike on sales tax and there'll be another pushbacks towards levies, but there won't be any real change, And we're going to have to be aggressive about that. We're going to have to be aggressive to say, however the vehicle turns out, that we're turning it out. If it's a Buffett education, it's called a Buffett education tax. It's a dedicated education tax on the top owners in the state. That's what we're going to have to do. If it's a combination of capital gains tax, if it's an implementation of an income tax, if it's all of these things, that replace potentially rising property taxes and market-driven sales taxes, then we're going to have to do that. We can't just walk away from this, and we've got to be aggressive about it. And we've got to say that we're going to bring these solutions to the table, and that they're going to happen sooner than later. Because we don't want the court to have to go back in and say, well, we're here we are again, and what are they supposed to do? Continue to fine the legislature $100,000 a day and chain them to their desks, No. The legislature should be able to act as leaders, or they should be taken out of office, plain and simple.
I kind of come at this from an angle of someone who's done a lot of complex litigation, and so this showdown, the timing of it all is kind of all too familiar, which is that no settlement ever happens until the deadline, and usually after the deadline. So it shouldn't surprise any of us that we haven't reached anything yet, because the court has granted a deadline of the next session. So, but what do we have to work towards? We have to work towards a compromise, and part of that is going to be this pressing the point that here we are in Seattle. We're Seattle liberals wanting to fund education. What does that actually mean? We're not actually benefiting Seattle. What we really want is to benefit the other districts in the state that do not have the same tax base that we have to levy. And who is this going to benefit? People in the poorer and redder districts. So I think there is daylight here to really go and make that point that, hey, we're trying to benefit the students of the next generation growing up in these many Republican districts. And that is the opportunity to make the change that we need, because it's not going to be a Democrats ramming it through, Seattle progressive ramming it through sort of thing. It is going to have to be something that is a compromise.
So I think that part of the issue is there's too many politicians in Olympia that believe there's tax cuts for every solution in government. And we have to take on those politicians, and we need to take on the powerful corporations that want to continue to receive billions upon billions of dollars in tax subsidies that don't necessarily produce benefits that can close the gap for education. The McCleary funding gap is $4 billion. We passed the largest corporate tax cut in history for Boeing with no job guarantees. The Seattle Times came out with an article and said it was $300 million in 1 year alone. In terms of there was no, and in addition to that, there was no guarantees that they would have to keep jobs in the state of Washington. That is just an example of one tax rate. Over the next 10 years, it will be a $12 billion giveaway to the Boeing Corporation. That is enough alone to close the McCleary funding. I think we have got to take on the powerful corporations that want to continue to receive tax breaks that take away the funding for and investments for children in our future that we clearly have the revenue to do. And that's only one tax break. There's dozens of tax breaks out there that can help close the revenue gap. So I think it's really important that we be very strong and understand that part of what we need to do is challenge the powerful corporate interests to create fully funded education.
I think that one of the continuing shortcomings of Democrats and the Democratic Party, and we have all seen this, is that we think having the right answer is enough, and that having the right policy is enough. Because everybody in this room believes that the right solution for McCleary is to raise new revenue from progressive sources, and to have a capital gains tax, to have a progressive state income tax, to sunset and close business tax loopholes. Everybody agrees on these things, but we have not gotten out there and sold them. As a party, this is one of our shortcomings. We think that if we don't get out there, if we go out there with the right answer and we don't get the right response from voters, then something's the matter with Kansas. It's something wrong with the voters rather than us not getting out there and selling and messaging and getting out there with the policies and with the story behind them to support them. And so really, that's what we need to be doing now. That's what I'll be doing in 2017, is getting out there with the messaging to voters that says, here is why we need to do this, here is what we need to do, and here is why we should be doing it. So we should have a progressive capital, we should have a progressive income tax, we should have a capital gains tax, because we should be investing in education, and that benefits everyone. And that's what we need to do as a state, that's what we need to do as a legislative body, and we should be building support for that because we know it has to happen. So we should be working on it in that direction, and that's what I'll be doing.
All right, on moving from K through 12 education to higher education, we all know that higher education is really unaffordable and inaccessible to way too many people. I'm a UW student. There are a number of UW students in the crowd and recent grads. Like a lot of UW students, I've gone down to Olympia and lobbied legislators to make college more affordable. But in those discussions and those visits, our top priority has always been freezing or reducing in-state tuition. So now that in-state tuition is being reduced, what would your top priority be to make college more affordable? And let's start with Nicole.
So a couple things. First of all, we've frozen tuition, but we have not increased state investment in our university system. And so what that will do is that we'll have sort of McCleary 2 coming up as we just see slow degrading of the quality of our world-class universities and colleges in Washington State. So we need to address that and ensure continued state investment even as we cap tuition. So there are a couple of other things that we can do. So we can and should expand the state need grant. We, I think, fund about 70,000 students across the state, and that's only about 70% of folks who qualify for that grant. And so we can and should do more to expand access to that and make real investments in that. And then I think there's a lot that we can do around student loan repayment. I worked on a bill that was successful in the 2016 session to create student loan repayment for folks working in the behavioral health field. So people who dedicate their life to working with people with mental illness, including social workers and bachelor level workers and Marines, to ensure that they can choose professions where they can make the right choices. And then I think finally we need to invest in our community college system, and I am a proponent of free community college.
As someone who's worked in higher education, I've spent a number of years working with students. I've worked also at UW for a number of years after moving out from the East Coast, along both as a volunteer and as a full-time staff person. But having worked with Graduate Washington, we've really focused our attention